Miracles. For some people, they're the ultimate proof of the divine. But for others, they're just impossible stories from a long, long time ago. It feels like this huge conflict, right? The unbreakable laws of nature on one side and these claims of the supernatural on the other. But is that really the whole picture? Let's dig in. So this is the big question, isn't it? Are miracles just scientifically impossible? For centuries, this has been this huge debate. But you know what? The answer might have less to do with science labs and telescopes and a lot more to do with our own basic assumptions about how reality even works. All right, to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to start with the biggest, most common argument you'll hear against the very idea of miracles. Yeah, this is the classic objection, the one you hear all the time. And it sounds super logical, right? It's clean, it's simple. We've all seen gravity work every single time without fail. So the thinking goes, how could somebody possibly walk on water? It seems to fly in the face of everything we know. But here's the thing you've got to understand. This objection, it's not purely a scientific one. It's actually rooted in a philosophical worldview, and it's called naturalism. Basically, if you start with the assumption that nature is a sealed box and there's absolutely nothing outside of that box, well, then miracles are impossible by definition, before you even look at one piece of evidence. And this whole line of thinking, it's not new at all. In fact, it was laid out super powerfully by one of history's most famous philosophers. So let's go back and meet the guy. Let's talk about David Hume. Way back in the 18th century, this Scottish philosopher put together an argument against miracles that was so persuasive, it's pretty much the foundation for a lot of skepticism even today. His logic was basically designed to be an intellectual firewall against any claim of a miracle, ever. Okay, so here's the core of Hume's argument, and it's pretty clever. He said our knowledge of natural laws is built on tons and tons of repeating observations, what he called firm and unalterable experience. A miracle, though, is by definition a one-time thing, reported by maybe a handful of people. Hume's point was that the overwhelming evidence for the regular natural law will always be stronger than the very limited testimony for the rare exception. But, and this is a big but, philosophers have poked some pretty big holes in this argument since then. The biggest problem? It's kind of circular. He basically defines miracles as being the most improbable thing that could ever happen, and then concludes, surprise, they're too improbable to believe. It also makes a huge assumption that our understanding of natural law is perfect and complete, which is a claim that science itself, with its history of massive discoveries, would probably never make. And all of this leads us to a really fascinating question. What if this entire debate is just based on a big misunderstanding of what a natural law actually is? Let's try looking at this a different way. Now, this is where things get super interesting. It really boils down to two different ways of looking at natural laws. Are they prescriptive, like a set of rules that tells nature what it absolutely must do, no exceptions allowed? Or are they descriptive, just our best attempt at describing the regular patterns we see over and over? Because if they're descriptive, well, then they describe the normal flow of the show, but they don't stop the director from walking on stage if he wants to. And check out this analogy, because it makes it crystal clear. Imagine you have water flowing through some pipes. An engineer can come along and redirect that water. Now, did the engineer break the laws of physics? Of course not. The laws of pressure and flow are all still working perfectly. The engineer just introduced a new force from outside the system of pipes. The Christian argument is that a miracle works just like that. God, the engineer of the whole universe, steps in without breaking the very laws he put in place. So when you see it that way, you realize what's really going on here. This whole debate isn't really science versus religion. It's a clash between two totally different starting points, two different worldviews. And here's the bottom line. For a lot of people, rejecting miracles isn't the end result of some big investigation. It's the starting assumption. If you start out wearing naturalistic glasses, the lens that shapes how you see everything, then of course, you're going to interpret everything through that lens. The very idea of the supernatural is just off the table from the get-go. Okay, but here's the real kicker. The objection to miracles is that they are these unique, one-time events. But naturalism itself has its own set of unique, one-time events that it has to accept to explain reality. You've got the origin of the entire universe from nothing, the Big Bang, and the origin of living things from non-living chemicals. Both of these are one-time, unobserved, and unrepeatable events. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Listen to Francis Crick, the guy who co-discovered the structure of DNA, a Nobel Prize winner. He himself admitted how unbelievably improbable the natural origin of life seems. The odds are so crazy small that he actually uses the word miracle to describe it. So that really makes you wonder, right? Why is one kind of singularity rejected on principle, while another is just accepted as a scientific fact? Okay, so if the philosophical arguments against miracles aren't the slam dunk they appear to be, what about the actual case for them? Now the conversation has to shift from the physics lab to the history books. See, the main case for believing that miracles have actually happened isn't about trying to repeat them in a lab. It's all about historical investigation. It means treating these claims not as philosophical problems you just dismiss, but as reported events that you can test using the tools of history. And that means digging into the testimony of the people who said they saw them. And when you start digging into the history, there's one event that everything else kind of hinges on. The historical case for the resurrection of Jesus is seen as the absolute central claim. The thinking is, if this, the biggest, most world-changing miracle of all, can actually be backed up by historical evidence, then all the other, lesser miracles at least become believable. So, when historians actually look into this claim, they're not just taking things on faith. They use a standard toolkit. And what they find is pretty interesting. Multiple independent accounts in the Gospels. They find backup from skeptical, even hostile, non-Christian sources from that time, like Celsus and the Jewish Talmud. Now, these sources don't agree on why Jesus had these powers. They often chalked it up to sorcery, but they do confirm his reputation as someone who performed extraordinary deeds. And all that testimony, coming from different angles, forms the heart of the positive case. And that brings us right back to where we started, but with a much sharper question for you. This whole debate isn't just a simple choice between science and superstition. It's a choice between two different kinds of evidence. Science is incredible at describing the normal, repeatable patterns of our world, but history is the tool we have to investigate unique, one-of-a-kind events in the past. So when they seem to clash over one specific event, which one do you trust? And that choice, in the end, really comes down to your worldview.